On the morning of September 11th, 1973, the residents of Santiago, Chile awoke to the sound of fighter jets streaking over their city. Earlier that day, the Chilean military had launched their coup d'etat by seizing key points of communication and transportation in Santiago and other cities throughout the country. The last holdout of Chile's democratic government was the presidential palace, La Moneda, where President Salvador Allende's bodyguards fought a hopeless battle against the onslaught of artillery shells and aerial bombardment. As the walls of the palace shook around him, Allende issued a final farewell to his country over the few radio stations which had avoided military capture.
Colocado en un tránsito histórico, pagaré con mi vida la lealtad del pueblo. Y les digo que tengo la certeza que la semilla que entregáramos a la conciencia digna de miles y miles de chilenos no podrá ser cegada definitivamente. Tienen la fuerza, podrán avasallarnos, pero no se detienen los procesos sociales ni con el crimen ni con la fuerza. La historia es nuestra y la hacen los pueblos.
At 2:30 p.m., after nearly 6 hours of fighting, the defenders of La Moneda finally surrendered. President Allende was dead, and Chile's brief experiment in democratic socialism had died with him. The CIA-backed coup against Allende's government is one of the most consequential events of the 20th century. It ushered in the rule of far-right dictator Augusto Pinochet, who supervised a campaign of mass murder and torture that was facilitated by the assistance of the United States government. While that story deserves more coverage, in this video I want to look at Allende's presidency itself, since its accomplishments and complexities are often overshadowed by the coup that ended it. Many Latin American countries experienced CIA-backed military coups during the 1960s and 70s, but Chile was unique. Compared to other countries like Brazil and Argentina, which had been recently governed by military dictatorships, Chile was in its 46th year of democratic rule when the coup took place. As one of the most stable and institutionalized democracies in the region, it's unsurprising that Allende believed, until the morning of September 11th, that the military would respect the Chilean constitution, as it had done for decades. As a multi-party democracy, the Chilean political system was in many ways more democratic than the two-party duopoly that dominates the United States today. In the decades ahead of Allende's election in 1970, three main political forces vied for power in the country: the right wing, led by Jorge Alessandri, the moderate Christian Democrats, led by Eduardo Frei, and the left wing, which was made up of multiple parties, the strongest of which was Allende's Socialist Party. Although Allende had previously run for president in 1952 and 1958, 1964 was the first election in which he nearly won. In fact, the growth in left-wing beliefs among the Chilean electorate was so threatening to American business interests that the CIA spent more than $2.6 million in order to ensure Frei's victory in 1964. Despite some mild reforms, like the limited redistribution of unused farmland to poor Chileans, the Frei government was unable to solve Chile's growing crises of homelessness, poverty, and economic inequality. As the 1970 election approached, Allende brought together a coalition of left-wing parties in order to supplement his voting base from the Socialist Party. As the only candidate with a clear vision on how to radically transform the Chilean economy, Allende's popularity surged, while his opposition was split between Alessandri, leading a coalition of right-wing parties, and Radamoro Tomic, who replaced Frei as head of the Christian Democrats. Although Allende won a plurality of votes, the Chilean constitution stated that unless any candidate won an outright majority, the Congress would decide between the top two candidates. In the previous three elections when this had taken place, the Congress had quickly confirmed the top candidate with hardly any debate. However, a Red Scare among the Chilean political elite, combined with an intense CIA propaganda campaign, led to a lengthy deliberation in Congress. Nonetheless, Allende was eventually confirmed and finally inaugurated as president on November 3, 1970. In only 6 years, he planned to transition the Chilean economy from capitalism to socialism while working within the boundaries of Chile's constitution. With the support of congresspeople from the leftist parties, as well as the more radical members of the Christian Democrats, Allende rapidly implemented a large part of his agenda. Nationalization of critical industries is one of the most important parts of the transition to socialism, and was undertaken quickly under Allende's presidency. The most critical industry was copper, which made up over 50% of Chile's export revenue. Eduardo Frey's government had already partially nationalized the industry by acquiring a 51% share in foreign-owned mines. Allende wanted to bring that up to 100%. However, the Chilean constitution required that just compensation be made according to, quote, minimum international standards. However, Allende chose to deduct the amount of compensation to American mine owners by factoring in, quote, excessive profits which the companies had extracted from the country instead of reinvesting. For many of the mines, this figure exceeded their estimated value, allowing Allende's government to nationalize the industry for a small sum. Obviously, this angered American business interests, but I think it was a fair decision given the incredible wealth these businesses had gained while abusing their workers with poor conditions and low wages. That kind of exploitation has defined the economic relationship between the First and Third World for hundreds of years. Look up primitive accumulation if you want to learn more. With copper mines now under state ownership, their profits could go to improving the lives of average Chileans, rather than fattening the wallets of American investors.